There are two principal challenges which we address. One is paying the cloud provider. So we handle all of the billing and accounting and monitoring of spend in the cloud. But the other is helping researchers learn how to use the cloud. It has everything you could ever want to do any project you ever thought of. But it's a little overwhelming. They've got so much that if you're a researcher who just wants to do X, you need a little help on, well, what tools should I use in order to do X? And by the way, what does it cost? Because I don't have all that much money. So part of our consulting is cost optimization.
So one of the things that makes CloudBank unique is that indirect costs are waived. So if a researcher budgeted for $50K to use in the cloud, they get $50K in public cloud resources that they get to spend. The second thing is that CloudBank is designed to be multi-cloud. So once a researcher is onboarded to CloudBank, they can use any of the public clouds that we support. And the reason for that is that we use a pay-per-use model, and so the funds are never committed to any one vendor, so that makes it very flexible for researchers. So CloudBank currently supports researchers primarily from the SCIES Directorate at NSF, and these researchers have a wide variety of projects, so from IoT and edge computing, machine learning, quantum computing, data storage and data processing services, chip design, and also classroom training.
The future of CloudBank is really that we've developed a paradigm of how relationships between the funder and the researchers or the spender get structured and get facilitated for commercial spending in the cloud. That kind of concept applies to a number of other areas. And what we're looking at right now is who else would be interested. You could imagine having conversations with industrial partners that they might be interested. You could imagine foundations wanting to support their researchers in a similar way and modeling their relationship onto the CloudBank model. And I think there's a lot that could still come out of this in the future in terms of applying what we've developed with CloudBank onto other areas of pursuit.